Hey, Preetam, how you doing today? Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Eric, thanks so much for having me on. Doing well. Can't complain. It's nice and 42 degrees in New York City, which is great for this time of year.
Awesome. Yeah, I hate to talk about the weather here in San Diego, but let's just say, you know how it is. 60 degrees, sun shining. Might go to the beach later, but I try not to brag. I actually grew up kind of half time in New York, so I know those winters very well.
Yeah, no, it actually hasn't been bad. I don't think we've had snow on the ground in a very long time, if at all, this season. So can't complain at all.
Awesome. Well, I'm really excited to talk to you today to talk about the world of cybersecurity and ransomware and all the nasty things that hackers are doing to people. Actually, some of my formative years when I was a teenager, I was a hacker myself and went from the black hat to the white hat and went through that whole journey. Happy to talk to you about it today. But first and foremost, actually, I want to learn about you and your background and really kind of what set you on this founder's journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I grew up a quintessential tech nerd, and I think that's the politically correct terminology. I did my undergrad at Yale, where I focused on mathematics and economics and chemical engineering, because why not? And doubled down on that with a PhD in cybersecurity and machine learning, really building on that strong math foundation, which has always been something I've really enjoyed, and have been able to transition that knowledge base into something that is very helpful as we build Elpha Secure, which is a cyber insurance and cybersecurity company all bundled into one.
Awesome. So what did you do before you started this company?
Yeah, so I directly came, finished up a PhD program and went straight into it. I think it was really nice. I would say that the PhD program I completed at Columbia was very distinct in that my PhD advisor is, a lot of his students have gone on to form very successful companies. And so I felt like I was in a bit of a startup incubator because I could talk to great mentors because they were PhD students of my same advisor who have gone on to do great things. So Wenki Lee and others have formed companies that have sold for very large sums of dollars, had a huge amount of impact, worked with the US government, a lot of those companies. So have gotten government exposure from them, good private exposure. So had a lot of great real world experience while still doing a PhD.
Yeah. So what was the problem or the pain that you saw that you decided to go after?
Yeah, so the problem was pretty simple, actually. I thought cybersecurity is a big problem. There's space for everyone. But what you realize, I went to this conference called RSA Security. I don't know if you've ever been. It's in your backyard. It's in San Francisco. And it's the week in San Francisco where I say the hotel fares are going to double. Everything's going to be twice as expensive because it is overrun with security people like myself who come there. And so back in 2017, I had the privilege to go as a security scholar selected by RSA to learn about the program. And I got to meet with all the companies there, and it was really exciting. It is honestly Disneyland for people who are technical. You get to see the cool companies. It's like CES for security. And the aha moment, I would say, is you walk around and you see these great security products that are available for large enterprise. But what about the small, mid-sized businesses? They face a lot of the same challenges, but they're not at RSA. They can't afford that $2,000 ticket, which even gets you into RSA, let alone the $10,000 plus security spend you need to have in order to even have basic cybersecurity. Right. So the aha moment was, hey, there's these companies that face the same challenges, can't get access to the same great software. What can I do with my technical background in terms of delivering that same software to them? And also the other side of this was, it's always great to see cybersecurity software that has a really strong functionality. What happens when the software doesn't work? Software is not 100% guaranteed. What actually happens on failure? Somebody's going to lose money. And I really like the concept of bundling insurance, which is the financial protection, with the software, which is the software protection. So when you bundle those two pieces together, I think you get a very strong value proposition.
Interesting. So let's talk about the world of ransomware and cyber attacks as it exists today. Obviously, there's a lot of headlines, but if I'm a business owner, right? If I'm a founder of a SaaS company, a member of our audience here, what does it look like? What happens to me?
Yeah, it basically seems like nothing has happened to you at first. And then you realize hey, all my devices are encrypted. I can't access my data. I can't even log in at times. And then you'll get a ransom of sorts saying, if you pay X amount of Bitcoin, you will get your data. You'll get a key which unlocks your data. Okay. And that's how ransomware happens. And you might be thinking, well, I don't go on any sketchy websites, so nothing should happen to me. I'm safe from ransomware. Well, the funny thing is ransomware comes into your system in all different ways. Sometimes you get an email and you click on a link that looks a little suspicious. You don't think anything of it. I remember I used to get these scam emails that would send this really, like a friend has shared a document with you on Google, and you always get a really realistic looking link. And you go to this website, the link doesn't work, but you enter your username and password sometimes, and they steal your password credentials, or they can actually load things onto your computer. So ransomware comes into your system many, many different ways. And it's a really painful process when it happens because your systems are locked down and you can't do anything. Your business is going to grind to a halt until you can get your systems back live.
You had to go and buy Bitcoin. You got to send Bitcoin to some address. And is that really a sure thing? Like they're actually going to go ahead and do it, or can they just take the money and run?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure they could just take the money and run, but in my experience, they are pretty good about actually unlocking the data at that point. That's not to say data hasn't been exfiltrated from your system, because that's what I call ransomware 2.0, is that now they ransom you once by locking your data. Second time they go, hey, Eric, by the way, I've got that, PowerPoint file that was on your desktop. Was that important to you? Because unless you pay something else, that's going on the internet.
I'm going to share it. Wow. Secrets as well. I've read recently that there's been a pushback where a lot of companies are actually sort of refusing to pay. What does that mean? And how's that playing out?
Yeah, a lot of companies are getting more cyber literate, as I call it, right? Okay. You can prevent ransomware as by installing an EDR endpoint software that can catch ransomware before it takes place. And once ransomware actually does take place, a lot of people are able to avoid paying the ransom by having a strong backup of their systems. If you have a strong backup, all you'd have to do is restore your systems, just put the backup data on, and just move on with your life. And so that's how companies are fighting back against hackers. And obviously, but I will say that that's not how the world works. Attackers are getting smarter, so they are adapting quickly to these types of measures taken by companies.
Yeah. So it's an arms race as usual. Yeah.
It's an arms race. I mean, one common vector by which ransomware was coming in was through open RDP ports. And everyone was like, we shut the RDP ports. We're good to go now. No more ransomware, right? And then they find the next vector.
Yeah. I guess same as viruses, right? That's interesting. Yeah. So, it's funny you mentioned like you would go to the RSA conference, and in my world, I would go to the DEF CON conference a little bit farther away. But the first time I went to DEF CON, I think I was in my late 20s. So this is the biggest hacker convention in the world. This is where white hat and black hat convention or people go. And the first thing I learned is just how if somebody really wants to get you, they can get you. It's just not that hard. There's so many ways in which we leave traces and we leave information, fingerprints, photographs, devices, etc. And it was basically a weekend of literally just trying to like hide my face, cover my fingerprint. I walked around with gloves on. I didn't even bring my phone. There was no devices at all. I just brought like a point and shoot camera. This was, more than a decade ago. Had a really great time, but it's just a very eye-opening experience. I think, if anyone, really wants to see what is on the other side of that arms race, it's pretty compelling. It's a lot of fun.
No, absolutely. I think DEF CON's like one of the most fun conferences for anyone who is technically orientated. It is a absolute blast to go there and see what they're doing. I go to Black Hat and DEF CON since they're right next to each other in terms of timing wise in Vegas. And I will tell you, it is it's a first week of August conference in Las Vegas. So it is a hot conference. But aside from that, it is great content that's covered, and the trainings you get, they teach you how to act like a hacker. And it is impressive what these guys can do on a computer.
What's something that impressed you recently?
I was really impressed, and I'm going to go back a few years to this one. And I'll do a little homage to a friend of mine who presented at Black Hat in London. I think it was 3 years ago now. And I found out that attackers are now leveraging temperature of devices to enable attacks. And that trend, I actually have gone to subsequent black hats and I've seen this trend talked about many times. But I think my friend who I did the PhD program with, he was one of the first to discover it. And effectively, you can make the processor move at a different cadence based on the temperature. So you can actually stick your cell phone or your laptop in the freezer, and you can actually hack a computer more easily that way.
Oh, wow. Wow. That's interesting. Man, the last time I was, this was over a decade ago, where all of the cars were transitioning to RFID key fob entry, and just how easily somebody could just walk by your car and scan your and basically, spoof your key fob and just get into your car. They had all these demos. So they had all these nice high-end Mercedes cars and whatever. Guy just walks up, kind of pokes a couple thing on a PDA and just opens the car and drives away. And, everyone went crazy. It's super fun. Thankfully they're evil, but they're also kind of nice about it. Like there was one time where somebody, again, like got a picture of my face and created this whole profile, like fake profile with a badge, all this kind of stuff. And basically like, okay, I'm you now, right? Like, so if I'm working at your company, I'm walking in the front door, I've got all your information. Like I've looked you up through reverse image search and I can convince anybody, that sort of thing.
That's what, sorry to interrupt, Eric. I think that's what makes generative AI so scary, right? People can spoof what you look like very easily. It's really easy to create a really good fake of you. I think I saw one where a friend of mine wanted me to feel better about myself. So he found a bodybuilder and superimposed my head on him, and it looked perfect. That's going to be my profile picture everywhere now because I'm very proud of the physique I had attained. But it's the beauty of like technology now, and that's what makes some of these tools that I'm sure you've used ChatGPT. That's what is making a lot of these things dangerous. I think somebody said, hey, you can make ChatGPT generate malware code for you.
Yeah. So, the script kiddies, if you will, back in the day would just sort of pass around something that somebody else wrote. Now they can just say, ChatGPT, build me something that's going to get in here. What does that frontier look like for you, do you think? What do you think, so that if that's the next stage in the arms race, what do you think is most vulnerable?
Yeah, I think identity is obviously, like, since we're on that identity pathway, right? I think it's going to be really important to define who is who in the world, right? And within organizations, it's really important. Identity management is one of the most important areas of cybersecurity. Right. I always define the 3 most important areas of cyber, in my personal opinion, for a small business. Obviously, every area of cyber, you're only as good as your weakest link. So I might list off 3 here, but you might think of a 5th or 6th or 10th one. Those are all important, but I'd say the 3 that our company focuses on, and I always think about, are identity, endpoint, and email. These are vectors through which you can have a huge security incident very easily, unless it's taken proper precautions. So I'm really worried about identity. People are great at spoofing each other. Once you spoof your person to someone else with a realistic looking fake email address, you can get someone to wire some any amount of money basically pretty easily. And that's wire fraud is turning into a major loss in cyber insurance. We're seeing it happen more and more. Fake invoices, really. Yeah. You spoof a document, people fall for that. Some of these documents, I've seen the spoof documents. I saw a claim recently where someone shared the spoof document. I'll be honest, these are so realistic looking that no one would know the difference. You'd really have to call and verify to make sure it's a real document.
Wow.
And in the identity case, I've definitely seen it where badges are getting spoofed with pictures of people that are superimposed. So it's happening all the time.
I had a friend one time. So back in the day, I used to travel and go backpacking and stuff around the world. And my backpacking buddy basically spent like 6 to 8 months of the year on the road. This was just sort of his life. And one time, I was back here and I got an email from him and had this very, very elaborate story, very convincing story about how he'd been mugged and he lost all of his credit cards and everything like that. And I needed to wire money to this place in Argentina where he was staying. And everything made perfect sense, except there was one sentence where he said, I didn't know what to do. I was just crying and I was so afraid. And I'm like, no, that's not him. like he wouldn't cry. He would just figure it out. Like he was that, I had to know him so well to be like, that's not it, and I ended up finding him. And I had to track him down and found out that he wasn't in Argentina. He was in Portugal. I was like, hey, people are probably getting scammed right now. But it took like a really, really deep level of knowledge and intuition, I think, to overcome it. So yeah, these folks are super savvy. So what can companies do to protect themselves?
I think companies can, buy an Elpha Secure cyber policy. But realistically, I think companies need to be very serious about how they manage their security posture. And I would love to tell you that there's great open source tools out there, and there are, but it requires a lot of configuration, making them work right for your company. So I'd recommend starting out with some basic cybersecurity tools. And it also starts with the plan. Before you even buy anything, you should start out and sit down and write your cyber incident response plan. Something goes wrong. What are you doing? It's like when we were kids growing up, we used to draft plans on, if there's a fire, which escape do we take? Which escape route do we take? And so the same way for a cyber incident response plan, find out the scenarios of what you would do if something goes wrong. And then you can backtrack into really figuring out, what do I need to prevent these things from going wrong in the first place? And oftentimes you'll find out that you might want an antivirus EDR type product, which will protect you from a lot of the malwares that are known to people. And even some of the 0-day malwares are caught by these software. So those are great. I'd highly recommend backups. If you have a backup of your system, even if you get ransom, you can restore from a backup. So that's critical. Make sure that you understand your identity piece. Make sure that if you don't use RDP, why do you have that port open? Any open port is like a door to your house. Like, don't leave more doors open to your house than you absolutely need to. So I think these are the big pieces that really go into starting to build a cyber posture. And the one thing I'll tell you about cybersecurity is it's an endless battle. We can buy every single good piece of software out there, and someone could still get through the door. There could be a hidden door underneath the house, right? So it's about building cyber resilience. And that's takes time, and also really educating your entire team. I think security, like I've said many times on this call here, is you are only as good as your weakest link. So if there's an employee who can get tricked, that person also is a security vulnerability. Even if you have really great software. So it's really important to educate everyone on security tools and how they all work together.
Yeah. So, in startup world, but I think in general, right? Like they say that security is the enemy of speed, right? That you're making a trade-off when you're investing in security, because there's time and money and energy that has to go into making these systems secure. And I know I've experienced it a lot, and I know a lot of startup founders just say, well, there's a certain amount of risk that we have to take in order to not slow ourselves down. So the big question is, what's the right amount, right? How much time and energy and effort should go into securing a small business or a security or a startup that, obviously has other important things to work on? What do you think would say like absolute, must have, any startup needs to focus on and is worth the investment?
So every startup, I think if you had someone, come into your office and break their leg, that's terrible, right? Like you might get a negative Twitter, tweet about yourself that says, oh, I went into company X and I broke my leg. Terrible company. That's one review. Cyber incidents can put your business completely out of business, right? It is the one type of incident in your organization that can clearly shut your doors. And that's why I think cyber has to be taken more seriously than any other threat that we really think about to our business. And so to that end, I'd highly recommend getting a strong cybersecurity insurance policy and the tools that are required as a part of it. That's why we believe in our value proposition at Elpha is we give you all the tools that you need to be cyber insurable. And so we make it very easy for businesses that, especially like you said, Eric, like people don't have time. When you're running a SaaS business, you're in the fintech space, you're thinking about your problem. You're not thinking about cybersecurity. That's why our company exists. We make it really easy for you to get the cyber hygiene you need and the cyber protection in case something goes wrong. So I think a cyber insurance policy is an absolute must for any company today.
Okay. Well, so that's on kind of the contingency side, right? To make sure that you're mitigating any of the impact that needs to happen on the front end in terms of maybe, protecting your data, protecting your code. What are some important things that founders should do?
Yeah, I think founders should be very careful with their passwords. I think strong passwords are very important. Multi-factor authentication, it doesn't matter how strong your password is. Having two ways of authenticating anything, like I can't log into my Gmail account without my YubiKey. Highly recommend everyone buy YubiKey. It's a very simple device that adds a second layer of protection to any sensitive account. Email is one I protect very thoroughly. So I recommend multi-factor authentication, recommend backups, and I'd recommend an endpoint product, something to protect the computers that you work on, the servers that you store your data on. Everything that you're using should have some level of protection. It's the same way that in your house, you feel much more safe if you have a security system. Put a security system anywhere where there's important data you know of, and definitely talk to your employees. I think it's really important that it's not just a CEO who's aware of their cyber posture. Every employee in the company should know what they need to do to protect their company from being hacked.
Yeah. So I actually used to do security assessments for startups. And one of the things that usually what would happen is the company's getting audited for whatever reason, they're trying to get some sort of ISO certification or what have you. And they say, okay, we want to get I would do sort of a pre-audit, right? Prepare them for the audit. And what I would talk about always is a culture of security, right? I'm not here to help you just pass the audit, because that's BS, right? That's disingenuous to say, all right, well, we're going to create all these policies, and we're going to say we're doing all these things. We're going to take a bunch of screenshots, and then we're just going to go back to doing whatever. But to actually say, how do we instill a culture of security in our company? And to me, that speaks to what you were saying, is obviously it can't just be top down. It has to be everyone in the company really genuinely caring about protecting the data and protecting the systems. So really what I try to do, I'm a storyteller, so I always try to connect things to the customers, is just to say, well, how would you feel if your passwords were exposed, if your personal data was exposed, right? And what if you're using this platform, if you're using your own system, well, it's you, it's your family, it's your friends, if we make this thing huge, there's going to be all sorts of good people out there who are putting their data in our hands, and it's our job and our duty to do our best to protect them. And then you kind of ask from them, like, well, what's going on in your world, in your context, that you think could be vulnerable? Where do you think this thing could be broken down? And then finally giving them, or sort of empowering them, to raise their hand and say, hey, we're moving so fast, we're putting our data at risk, or we're making some choices here to cut some corners that could expose us to some vulnerability. So what often happens is the CEO is out of one side of their mouth talking about, we need to be secure, and on the other side of their mouth saying, we don't have time. And so really embracing that culture and that value of protecting your customers' sensitive data. Yeah. So you mentioned consulting again. I was a fractional CTO, so a technology consultant in general, with this focus on security. So some of the things I would do for fun would just be to try to hack them. Right, it's kind of part of the assessment, is just to be like, oh, that's wide open. I'm just going to poke right there, and then just show them, right? Because it's easier to show them than to tell them. And usually it's typically the social engineering and hacking the individuals, right? Even just saying like, hey, I'm a consultant, tell me everything you know. And they just go and they tell me all sorts of secrets. And I'm like, I know there's some level of trust here, but they probably shouldn't have told me that. So even coaching, the team on how to engage with any sort of outside party, even if they're under the guise of helping them with security. Another thing too, and then I'm just sort of throwing out quick helpers for our audience here. I'm really a couple of tools that I would always use. One is the OWASP top 10, the OWASP top 10 guidelines for code security, as well as the PCI DSS guidelines for physical and data security. So there are these two organizations, these security compliance organizations, that publish these, top 10 checklist sort of things that really give you a good coverage across all these spectrums. So PCI DSS is more, it's focused on kind of the finance or fintech arena, but it goes through the identity, the physical security, data security, and system like IT security. But what I found that it's lacking is actually code security, securing the software itself to be secure, And that's where the OWASP top 10 comes in. So that really talks about how are you actually developing software in a secure way. Things like creating abstraction layers to your database, or obviously using tokens and encryption in your APIs, things of that nature. So those are two things that I think any founder should just go and grab and put to work.
No, absolutely. I also highly recommend an annual penetration test at the very least of your systems. They're quite inexpensive if you go with the right firm, and it really helps you understand your security posture from the outside in. There are so many easy ways that hackers can get into your systems and steal the data that you really care about. And obviously we all try our best, right? Like even our company, we try our best to do data security and making sure that we don't have these holes, and we're a cybersecurity company, but we still leverage an outside penetration testing firm to come in, poke the holes. We give them different levels of credentials. Then it's easier for them to poke more holes. Then sometimes we have them pretend like they don't know anything about our company. They try to poke some other holes. And what it really does for us as a company is helps us find things that we normally wouldn't do otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely agree. Yeah, so I think, sort of in general, in terms of creating this culture, especially in the startup stage, it has to be a part of your strategy. It can't be something that is either out there in the future or, a risk that you're completely willing to take, because it is a real risk with devastating consequences, and you are the steward of your customers' data as well as your investors' capital. And all of that can be put at risk with just one jerk who puts a target on your back and tries to get in and extract money from you. So absolutely, having some kind of policy or some kind of right size of security protection as well as insurance to create that contingency. And then, the annual penetration testing to poke holes and see where you need help. Seems like a pretty good, well-rounded strategy for folks.
Yeah. And honestly, you can go as far as you want with this because there's more and more you can do. But like Eric suggested, I think those are the bare minimums you want to start with.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I've worked in very large corporations that had very big, I worked in defense, for crying out loud. I worked at Raytheon for a couple of years at the beginning of my career. So I know what security to the absolute extreme looks like. And, it's really, really hard to keep up to those standards. And then there's just this incredibly broad spectrum where every step down from there is a calculated risk, right? That there's some degree of risk that you're choosing to take in order to again trade off for speed or cost. And you just have to figure out what you're comfortable with, but obviously just knowing your blind spots, right? So I want to transition a little bit to you as a leader and as you're starting and growing your first company. What do you have a leadership philosophy or leadership principles that you go by?
Yeah, I think our leadership concept is that we're all in the trenches together. So when you're an early stage company, I don't think anyone is any different from anyone else transparently on the team. We're all working towards a common goal here. And there's no job too big or too small for any member of the team. We have folks with 20 years of experience who will do things that people in high school could probably do. It's just because it's a all together philosophy. And I think at Elpha, I've done every single job that our company does, whether it's underwriting. I've been an underwriting assistant helping our underwriter fill out forms just to see what that experience is like and to help him expedite his work. I've done coding with some of our engineers. I've done it pretty much all. And that's been our philosophy, is that no one should be above anything and just work together. And it creates a really great culture. And building a company during COVID, I think if you want to make your life even more challenging, transform culture when everyone is remote, trying to recover from, COVID is happening. You can't really meet anyone in person. It's definitely been an interesting challenge, and creating culture was really important for us. And the way we did it is really when folks see that everyone is going to have their hands in all the pies, work on everything, that makes it really helpful for people to realize that I'm important in this organization and everyone is taking my role very seriously.
Wow. Yeah. So what do you think, kind of getting back to that time where you were forced to go remote, what were some of the big challenges that you had to overcome?
I think the biggest challenge is that our industry is a very in-person industry. Insurance, cybersecurity, folks really do like to meet up in person. Business moves much faster when you can meet in person, schedule a series of meetings in a very small conference window. It's just much more productive. I think as we transitioned throughout COVID and companies got more comfortable with Zoom, Teams, everything else like WebEx, once everyone got comfortable with using these video conferencing softwares, everything kind of went back to normal. I think the only aspect of our business that became more challenging is that team members weren't able to get together and, get coffee together, play board games, do something where it's a bond beyond just being in the office coding together.
Yeah. Well, how have you addressed that? How have you overcome that?
Yeah, since COVID, right? And our team is very dispersed. We have folks in New York, Washington State, California, you name it. We have people everywhere. And what we've done is we've found times when we get our teams together. We do small outings as well as annual outings where the whole team gets together, and we get that opportunity to form bonds with one another. And we have a huge culture where our team is very proactive. So we have 3 folks who work in Montreal. They actually find times to get together, get meals together, and it has nothing to do with company time. They just like spending time together. And that's what's helped us form a really strong culture as a company.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. I've spent a lot of time coaching and talking about the kind of the future of work. Is it in the office? Is it remote? Is it hybrid? And the model that seems the most compelling to me and seems to work the best for the people that I see do it is a hybrid model around like satellite offices where everyone can be dispersed, but individual teams or clusters of people are hired in the same general area for no reason other than just so that they can get together once in a while and form some bonds. Ideally, an entire team, right? A product team or development team or whatever is all in one area so they can get together and meet and brainstorm and bond together and whatnot. Yeah. So if you're going to be building a remote workforce, think about, where the bonds need to happen, right? Whether it's within teams or even just small pods of people, and geographically locating them in areas where there's talent, obviously where you can find talent, but also like thinking about time zones, thinking about things like that, where, if you're going to be putting people on a small team together, let's say, half a dozen or so engineers, product design, et cetera, and they're all over the place. They're all over the world. They're all over, different time zones. It's just going to be harder and harder for them to really connect and form those bonds of trust as a team. But if you have these different kind of locations of talent that you invest in, it can be all over the world, right? But if you create these little pods, then they're going to be able to have lunch, have coffee, go out to happy hour, play board games, whatever. And God forbid, get in an office once in a while and do some work. It makes for, I think, a really good balanced culture.
I think it's also helpful when the management of the company can be mobile. So in the case of my co-founder and I, we spend a lot of time on the road. This year, I think I anticipate spending 150 to 200 nights on the road. And the reason for that is we have team dispersed everywhere. And it's very important to me, at least, that our company team members get to spend time with senior management. So they don't feel like they're working in a silo away from everyone. We make a concerted effort that we meet everyone every 3 months, at least everyone on the team once every 3 months. And if not more than that, or for some folks, if they're really off to the side in one place where we can't reach them, at least once every 6 months. That's a goal of our company, because I think if you can't get some FaceTime and some time to spend with senior management, oftentimes you might worry about your place in the organization. I think it's very important that everyone realize that if we're a remote first company, it doesn't matter where you're located.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing I've seen a lot of companies do that works really well is even just having team vacations, right? So you think about an offsite, which is typically very work focused, right? As everyone gets into a conference room together and they work together for, a week on something strategic. There's just plenty of time for work in this day and age, right? Now that everybody's working remotely, there's not as much time commuting. There's not as much time talking around the water cooler and going out for lunches together as a team. So we've taken away all of that bonding time that naturally happened in the office and just replaced it with more work. And so the offsite now that matters most, or the value that you get from an offsite now, is really just forming those bonds together. So having it weight much, much more on the team building and the social aspect of it. And what I've seen work really, really well, there's one company I work with that every quarter they host at a different, a different locale where somebody's living, right? So somebody on the team, they live in, like you said, in New York or in Washington or in Canada. And they would go visit their hometowns. And then those individuals would be kind of the hosts for the weekend and help take people where they, where the cool places they like to go and that kind of thing. And so obviously it gets people together, they build some connections, and then it also gives the locals that kind of that pride of showing off, where they live. And they just have all these great memories and great experiences. Then when you get back on Zoom, they're friends, they're connected. They're happy to see each other. They've got memories to share and things like that. So that's something that I just really, really think leaders need to have their eye on right now, is to think about all the time that we used to spend connecting with each other in the office, and how do we intentionally replace that in the remote environment.
Absolutely. I think it's so important for people to get to spend time with their colleagues and just do things that are not work related. So I definitely, huge fan of that quarterly visit idea. And it's a super nice idea, especially if people are not too far away. I will say that's speaking from the startup's point of view now, Eric. Right. It is sometimes financially difficult if you have international teams. You're so right. I don't know if you want to take your entire team from the US and Canada to London. But there are definitely, I think, some exceptions to that rule, but in general, really like that concept.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. So otherwise, in terms of how you lead your team, what are some things, some principles that are top of mind for you?
Yeah, I think it's, I was always indoctrinated by my family, right? Hardworking, hardworking people. I think when others in your company see that you're working hard, putting the hours in, not just issuing commands from above, but working alongside them, I think it resonates much better. I think one of the biggest things that we do as a company is huge amount of transparency. I think I read this book on the huge importance of transparency to a team. What's going well, what's not going well. I think a lot of companies I've seen in the past, they paint a rosy picture and then they do 20% layoffs. Right. Well, if it was that rosy, why are you doing layoffs? So I think it's really important to have clear communication with your team. I think everyone in our company, whether it's the top engineer, bottom engineer, or however you want to view it, everybody knows everything about the company and they can explain the business. They can explain why we're doing things. Sure, they might not be in the nitty gritty details to tell you about distribution partner number X, but they could tell you generally how the business works and how everything, they're very up to date. And I think keeping people informed engages them beyond their role and that makes them more entrenched into the company. So I think transparency across the organization is very important.
Yeah. So leading by example, absolutely, especially as a startup founder, is critical. And then, being truthful and honest about the reality of the situation. It's interesting. You mentioned I've experienced it myself many times as well, that in startups are messy. Startups are hectic. You can be on a high one day and you can be in the dumps the next. And there's a certain amount of resiliency that's required to really make it in a startup. And founders or leaders that try too hard to shield the team from that end up, I think, doing a disservice, because people are smart. They figure things out. B is that now they see you as maybe not necessarily trustworthy. And then C, they don't get the tough skin that really is required to thrive in that environment. So what I find an approach that works much better is to be truthful and be transparent about the risks and the doubts and the pain that you're going through, but to wrap it in hope and optimism, right? Yes, we lost a lot of customers last month. That's terrible. That sucks. But we're still going to keep moving forward because we believe so strongly in our vision. But we got to double down on what we're doing, or what our customers really value, that sort of thing. So being truthful, but tying it to leadership, to motivation, that, hey, things are going to be rough. That's what we're here to do in a startup. but things are going to get better, and our vision is true.
Yeah. And I'd say the other advice I'd give a lot of other founders, which I found a lot of success with, is giving people exposure to things that they wouldn't normally do. And so I learned this when I was playing basketball growing up. I was always a tall kid and bigger. I think that was a nicer way of saying that I should be a center. But I always wanted to be a point guard. It was like my dream to, run down the court and just jack up a three. I think Steph Curry was, when I got older, that's why I love him so much, because he embodies what I wanted to do as a kid. But my coach at one point moved me from being center to point guard for a quarter. And obviously it was a failed experiment, but I loved it. And I really enjoyed the experience I got of playing point guard, because it's something I wanted to do. And it showed me like a new way to view the game. And I think that in our company, what we do is we try to bring people into roles that they're not in. So if your day-to-day work is being a back-end engineer, you don't see a single customer, we sometimes bring those folks in to see the customer, because when you see the customer that you're working with, it brings everything into perspective. You're not just a back-end engineer anymore. You're somebody whose software impacts their life. And so that really, I think, helps increase engagement we have from folks. And whenever we do this cross-team mixing, we found great success and everyone loves it.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, so I did something very similar. I actually required every engineer on my team to do a shift on customer service at least a couple times a year. And it was wild. So when I did my shift, we had these personas because, people see, I don't know if I'm saying anything that people should know about, but like when you engage with somebody in customer service, it might not always be the same person, because tickets get shuffled around. And so when someone responds to it, they are, logged into an account and they have a profile. And so I was Kelly. I was a vibrant, young, athlete enthusiast, music enthusiast that was so eager to help. And so I actually had to read a persona profile that our CS team had written on, like, when you are Kelly, this is how you communicate with people. This is your style of messaging and whatnot. So I was like super cheerful, like really eager to help. Cool. So somebody writes into a ticket and is just flaming, just cussing, just saying like the nastiest things because our product had broken when you really needed it. And my natural, inclination as an engineer would be like to give it back to him, right? Or to get really defensive and just be like, well, you don't know what you're doing. You're stupid. You don't know how to use it. But I forced myself into this mode of like, I'm here to help you. What can I do to help you? And it was this really great experience where one is I completely like deflated this person's anger to the point that he apologized and was like, I'm so sorry. Like, I didn't even think that you were a person. I thought I was just shouting into the void, and like, you're a real person. I really appreciate it. I'm so sorry for what I said. And then the second thing is that I really got to understand the problem that my software had caused him. And so then I went back to my team and was like, guys, like we got to do better in quality, especially around this one feature. Like we pushed this buggy thing. We had to get it out there fast. People really care about it. They want it, and it's falling apart. So we got to put some of this stuff aside, and we got to focus on, on shoring this thing up. And so it was just a really incredible experience. And that was eye-opening for me. And for that point forward, I said, all right, every single engineer on my team has to do a shift in customer service at least, 2 to 3 times a year. And they always bring back really, really fun stories.
Yeah. I think the other secret that companies call mentorship, I think even as a startup founder and it's very helpful. Like the mentors I have helped shape who I've become as a leader and have figured out how to navigate tough situations. I think it's so important for every single person in the company, I don't care how senior or junior you are, to have a mentor. And I've obviously stolen the concept that we had at Yale, which was to create families. And families at Yale just, they have residential colleges. So you're assigned to a random dorm and you're going to stay in that dorm for 4 years. And they give you parents and grandparents, which is such an interesting concept. Okay. So you get a brother, you get sisters, you get everything. And the concept is, so you get people who are your same year, who are your brothers and sisters, who are going through the same challenges, same parents, same struggles in life. And then you get parents who are older, like more senior to you, like hiring, their juniors and seniors, and they actually provide their guidance. They're like, oh, when I was a freshman, I did this wrong. Don't do that. And then when you're a junior or senior, you now have kids of your own, and then you have parents, and they're now the grandparents to your kids, and it creates this great network. We basically copied that model at Elpha. We assign someone parents, and the way our parents work is you have one parent from the engineering team and you have one parent from the business team. And so now you're getting exposure to both sides of the business from your parents. And then you have your mentors who will guide you because they're more senior in the company and they understand how it works. And then you have your fellow siblings who are also, at the same, level of experience as you, learning and going through the pains. And now you have like a group which is maybe distinct from what you're working on. We have people working cross teams in the structure, and they found it to be a really fun setup for them. And our company, one thing I'm really proud of as a startup founder, and it's something that I pride myself on, is that we don't have employees leave our company. And it's not because they're getting paid such exorbitant salaries. I'm not going to tell them that, but it's because I think people are generally happy with the work they're doing, and they're also really happy about the mentorship they're receiving. And I'll tell you, I can see the skill level of our engineers who have been here a year plus. They've been dramatically improved, and they're entirely different people. And I think it's largely attributed to the mentorship they've received.
That's incredible. I love that intentional systematic mentorship at a company of your size, I think is actually pretty rare. And I really admire that. I think a lot of startups kind of pride themselves even on self-reliance, right? And they filter for that, hey, we're going to hire people who can cut it. Everybody's got to, manage themselves and drive themselves and manage their own stuff. And that's it, because we don't have time for anything else. But that doesn't scale. And you're not really, planting a seed for a positive culture like that as you grow. So I really like that. And I think while the family metaphor is interesting, it's cute, I guess. It's funny. But I really like the idea in practice that you have people from different areas of the business. It's not just, I think if in a lot of companies, if there is mentorship at all, it's a senior engineer coaching a junior engineer, right? Or whatever, something of that nature, where they're in the same role and they're just sort of, collaborating together. But having people from different areas of the business, giving different perspectives, showing them what it's like to play a point guard, for example, is really interesting, because it gives people business acumen, it gives people perspective, it helps people create empathy. I like that a lot. Yeah. I might I think I might actually start encouraging that with some of my clients.
Yeah. Growing up, I think a lot of my philosophy about leadership, how teams should work, is shaped by sports. I was a tennis recruit going into college, and then I actually quit playing tennis as a freshman to join the crew team. And I could tell you, I was a very good tennis player, in my opinion. I was a terrible crew athlete. I was not in shape I could not do it. I had people I could lean on, people who could coach me, people who could help me be better. And I think that when you work together, you definitely get that 1 + 1 = 5 factor. It's not 1 + 1 = 2. You get the team working together. A team that works well together is 10 times more productive than a team that try to do it on their own.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. I mean, I personally, I actually didn't really play sports much growing up, but I was definitely more of a loner, the hacker kind of type. And that was something I really longed for, I think, growing up. I think it was pretty lonely. Now, that actually is what got me into the startup world, because it sort of gravitated towards that self-reliance, and that initiative made me successful in that realm. But yeah, it was always something that I really just felt was missing. And as I matured and grew in my career, was something that I actually actively sought out and made happen in my teams. And actually now as a coach, kind of on the other side, it's what I'm an evangelist for, right? Is this connection and this real deep empathy and human-centered, philosophy, because I grew up without that, and I saw the consequences really of having to be self-reliant. It's a double-edged sword, but as you said, it's probably much more valuable to have, obviously, a strong team behind you.
And it just feels like you just have a bigger group in your corner. So when you're not feeling well, you have people to lift you up. I think it's just such a helpful environment. Like, our team, I really pride ourselves on how well our team is able to work together to solve problems.
Wow.
And when they have like even personal issues, they're turning to their team members or family members. And I call them family members because we've created this family architecture. And people just, I think, respond very positively when they feel like they have others in their corner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it gives you confidence, right? That you can keep pushing through. So one last question for you. Are there any sort of growing pains or scaling struggles that you're dealing with now?
So I'd say the biggest challenge that you have, it's really exciting to raise capital.
Mm-hmm.
I think raising capital is a huge accomplishment. The team's super excited. As soon as the money hits the bank, you have to figure out exactly, you already have a plan going into it, but it's executing on that plan is always, a fun problem to face. I think the biggest scaling challenge that we figured out is really two things. One is we came out of COVID now, right? Or we're on the other side of it. COVID is still happening and people are unfortunately still losing their lives. But we are experiencing that dilemma of whether we go back to the office or not, because some of our employees really enjoy the office. So we've gone with the hybrid model that you described earlier, Eric, and some people go into the office more than others, and it seems to be working well. So that was definitely a growing pain for us, was understanding how the hybrid versus fully remote is going to work. The second growing pain is really understanding how maintaining culture in company as you grow in size. Because when you have an infusion of cash, it's great. You can go hire more employees, make your team stronger, build faster. But if you don't retain the right culture, it is so difficult to make sure that the team is harmonious. And our company for a long time was, my co-founder, myself. Then it was one more person. Then it was 5 more. And then we slowly grew over time. And now we're at a stage where 36 employees, which is still relatively small. And we'd like to get to 50, 60, 70 employees, but we're doing it very slowly, only because we want to be very sensitive to the culture that we've, cultivated within our company. We think that's definitely a growing pain that we want to work towards and make sure that people feel that they're joining an organization they feel comfortable spending a lot of time with. Because the one thing I'll tell you about a startup is it's, as you know, right, it's not a 9-to-5 job. I don't think anybody in our company works 40 hours because the work on our plates are just too much, right? It's the challenge of a startup. So even as we scale, we'll still have too much work, but you want to make sure that if you're spending that much time working on something, A, you're passionate about it, and B, you like the people you're working with. So making sure that scaling goes well is something that we think a lot about. It's not necessarily a problem, but it's something we think a lot about.
Yeah. Obviously, that's the big topics there probably would have to be for another episode or another conversation. But two things that stood out. One, that leading by values, creating a culture by your values, is the way to scale culture, right? So culture is something that's ephemeral. You can't really control it, but you can create a framework around your values, and those values can be sort of manifested in different contexts and different teams in different ways. So if you have a value of transparency, as you mentioned, well, what does transparency mean with respect to engineering, with respect to marketing, with respect to design, et cetera? And so having a really strong set of leadership values and then working through every single department, every single function to define what that means and how does that manifest in that context is the way to do it. And that's what I work with a lot of my coaching clients around. The other one is I think you talked about growing too fast. So there is definitely a tipping point where culture will shift. So if you have a group of people and you double the size of that group, now the culture is going to be something completely new. There isn't any sort of assimilation or embracing of the existing culture. So you have to, you have a group of people and there is a limit to how many people you can add in what time frame where they can now be absorbed in the culture, maybe change it a little bit, but not drastically so. And so that every new person that comes on, again, becomes sort of a part of that existing culture rather than becoming something entirely new. So that's a really common growing pain that I deal with, especially obviously with hyper growth companies, is how do you give the team time enough to gel so that they can welcome new people in without, again, drastically changing that culture?
Yeah, I think we have a rule that no more than like one new person per 2 week per team per 2 week period, because if you have to give them a little bit of time to get up to speed in that team before you add new people.
Yeah. Yeah. Even that's pretty fast. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're growing well. Awesome. Well, it's been a real pleasure talking with you today. I had a lot of fun. I love talking about hacking and security, all this kind of stuff. So it's cool to geek out with you. And obviously I really appreciate your leadership principles as well. I really do wish you the best of luck and the most success. And I hope everybody out there gets themselves a cyber insurance policy and protect themselves.
No, thanks, Eric. I really appreciate it. And one thing I'll say as a founder, I took advantage of other founders that were able to help me. So if anyone listening to this podcast wants to reach out, I'm always happy to get on a Zoom call, grab a coffee, and try to be as helpful as I can be, because I want to pass it along.
I love that. I appreciate it. Well, thank you so much.